Sonic the Hedgehog. To anyone unfamiliar with the series, they may think it's as simple as a speedy blue hedgehog who collects rings and fights an egg-shaped mad scientist. But to those who are familiar, we can confirm it's far more complicated than that. 3 iterations of Sonic are the focus of today's video precisely because of that, those being the Sonic the Hedgehog comic books. When it comes to the Sonic comics, I often see people talk about their many twists and turns when it comes to story and characters, and the information spreads like wildfire with no context. Short videos explaining story arcs or certain events from a character's perspective can certainly help, but if that's all someone absorbs of the content, they risk getting mixed up and making assumptions. Like how some people assume Ken Penders wrote all of early Archie Sonic before Ian Flynn started writing for the book, when there were other writers whose contributions shouldn't be forgotten, like Michael Gallagher and Carl Bollers. Even Dan Slott wrote for the comic. Yes, that Dan Slott. So today, I'm going to provide a, hopefully, easy guide to reading the various Sonic comics so you can finally get the full context yourself. Or if you've just been curious and wanted to check them out, but were a bit daunted by the sheer amount of them. Considering there's nearly 1,000 plus issues worth of content, and one of these series is currently ongoing, I don't blame you. We'll be answering 4 specific questions here. Those questions being, is this canon to the games? Are these comics connected to each other? What is the recommended reading order? And finally, what is a good place to start reading? Before we continue, I want to quickly state that I'll be referring to the comics by the abbreviated titles of Archie Sonic, Fleetway Sonic, or STC, and IDW Sonic. This is because the full titles of the Archie and IDW comics are Archie's Sonic the Hedgehog and IDW's Sonic the Hedgehog, respectively. Not only is that a mouthful, but there's 3 games, an anime OVA, a cartoon series, a manga series, and a film that are all just titled Sonic the Hedgehog. Fans needed a way to differentiate between them, so we're going with what's been decided by fans themselves. As for Sonic the Comic, fans have also been calling it STC for short, or Fleetway Sonic based on its publisher. And as a final note before we start, please go support the official releases. Or at least go support the IDW releases, since Archie and Fleetway have been out of print for years unless SEGA decides otherwise. Now for the first question. Are these canon to the games? The answers are simple. No, no, and yes. Archie, Sonic, and STC are completely separate from the games, and while knowledge from the games can certainly help when it comes to adaptations, you never need to read these to understand something in the games. In contrast, IDW is canon to the game universe, with Sonic mentioning Tangle the Lemur in Sonic Frontiers, Tails referencing Jewel and the Restoration in Tails Tube Episode 6.
So, have any plans for the holidays?
Yeah, actually. Jewel is organizing a holiday party over at Restoration HQ. Vector.
One of the lore managers, Chris Hernandez, confirming it in Episode 7 of Season 7 of Sonic Official.
I saw one question in there. Is IDW canon? It is canon.
Mm-hmm.
It does take place right after Forces.
And Crossworlds having multiple references through the rival interactions, but most blatantly during both versions of Espio and Zaz's interaction, referencing a fight they had exclusively in the comic.
Oh, you're a sneaky one. You won't creep up on me. I'm lashing out in all directions all the time. Hiya, hiya, hiya.
He's even more unhinged than the last time we faced off. I'll need to be extra careful when dealing with him this time. Your Berserker Wrath will do nothing for you here. I will defeat you as I have before, with disciplined mastery of the self.
Blah, blah, blah. This punk gets lucky in one scrap and he thinks he's the best of the best. I'ma teach you some manners.
So yeah, IDW Sonic is canon to the game universe, and if you don't like that, well, too bad. Nobody's forcing you to read it anyway. Now for the second question. Are the comics connected to each other? No, they're not. IDW Sonic obviously isn't connected to Archie Sonic and STC based on it being canon to the games, while the other two aren't. But Archie Sonic and Fleetway Sonic aren't connected to each other either, with one specific exception. Several characters from STC make cameos in Archie Sonic issue 134, the most blatant being Techno and Ebony, the former of which is even referred to by name and shows up again in issue 138. As a fun fact, Tiara Bubowski from the canceled game Sonic Extreme also makes cameos in these issues. But that's the only link between the two, and a nebulous one at best, as it was done merely as a joke tribute without direct permission, and thus the characters were never seen nor mentioned again. I suppose you could say the comics exist in a combined multiverse, which is a stance I like to personally take, but this has never been officially said. As a side note to this, Archie Sonic is perhaps the piece of Sonic media most connected to the franchise as a whole. It began life as a tie-in to advertise the Sonic SatAM cartoon before becoming popular enough to turn into its own unique continuity, draws characters and story elements from that cartoon and the previous one, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, has a possible link to the Sonic OVA, and even direct crossovers with the shows Sonic Underground, Sonic X, and Sonic Boom. So much Sonic media for over 2 decades, bearing direct or indirect connections to this one part, is really cool when you think about it. To be clear, though, you don't need to watch any of what I've described to read Archie Sonic, as the comic usually provides what you need to know. And as stated, Archie Sonic and Sonic SatAM are 2 distinct pieces of canon, with the comic even adapting a couple episodes and changing details in one to fit the comic. At most, watching Sonic SatAM will help you understand the type of world the comic is and some of its cast, at least initially. And since there's not a good time to mention this otherwise, despite the version of Robotnik from Fleetway Sonic changing his design early into the comic to resemble his counterpart from the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon, there's no actual connection between the show and STC. Now we move to the most important parts: the reading order and places you can start. We begin with Fleetway Sonic, which is thankfully rather simple. The main series is Sonic the Comic, which ran for 223 issues. Sort of. Here's the thing. Fleetway had a rather disliked policy when it came to reprints for any series that ran for about 5 years, and STC wasn't spared from it. As a result, issue 184 is the last issue to feature new material, while the remaining 39 issues have nothing but reprints. The only thing new about them is the covers, so if you read this series, just stop after issue 184. As for the spin-offs, Fleetway is the easiest of the Sonic comics in that regard. There's 3 holiday specials, a Knuckles special, and a poster magazine series. That's it. The first is Sonic the Summer Special, and while most of the stories are fairly standalone, the last story leads directly into issue 33. Next is the Sonic Holiday Special of 1995. With the exception of one story, most of the material is stories reprinted from Sonic the Poster Mag. These stories are once again standalone with the exception of Marble Garden Menace, which seems to take place between issues 34 and 35. And in case you're wondering if you have to read any of the Poster Magazine series, the answer is no. Aside from what I just mentioned, the only other content exclusive to that series is some posters, obviously, a couple of non-Sonic stories, and a new Sonic story exclusive to issue 8 that might be set between issues 38 and 40, but its inconsistencies might render it non-canon. Next is the Sonic Holiday Special of 1996, which has its first story take place before issue 80 and is thus the best time to read it. Finally, we have the Knuckles Knockout Special, which takes place before issue 73 as per its first story. Fun fact, this special came out the same month and year as Archie's own Knuckles miniseries. And that's basically it for Fleetway Sonic. With so few spin-offs, It's no surprise that this is the easiest series to read through. As for a good starting point, issue 1 is really the only viable place I can recommend. While it's generally agreed that the quality of the comic improves starting with issue 8, I still recommend going from the beginning to see that improvement. But before we move on, I need to address the elephant in the room. No, not you. Not you either. You don't even go here! I quickly mentioned some non-Sonic stories before, and that's because Fleetway also occasionally published stories for other games within the pages of this comic, most of them SEGA related. And let me immediately reassure you, none of these stories are required reading. They're simply for fun. So, if you've been curious about how any of these games would look like in Western comic form, feel free to read. The games that have stories made for them are as follows. For SEGA properties, we have Shinobi, Streets of Rage, Decap Attack, Kid Chameleon, Golden Axe, Echo the Dolphin, Shining Force, and Wonder Boy. The non-SEGA properties were Eternal Champions, Mutant League Football, Marco's Magic Football, and Rocket Knight Adventures. There was also 2 non-game properties, Pirate Sonic the Comic and Mega Droid, the former being based on adverts and the latter being the mascot of the comic. Hey, editing this in at the last minute, there was something I missed in my research. The official Sonic yearbooks published in 1993 and 1994. These were published before Fleetway Sonic, and besides the first Shinobi story, they also contain some standalone Sonic stories. It's unknown whether they're canon or not, but they're seemingly not important. Only read them if you want to. Side note, if anyone at IDW happens to see this video, please pitch a Rocket Knight Adventures comic to Konami. You've already worked with them on Silent Hill and Castlevania, so why not have another comic about anthro-animal characters? Also, more Castlevania comics would be great. Alright, now that we've taken care of that, let's move on to Archie Sonic. Archie Sonic is easily the most daunting of the Sonic comics for new fans to start reading, and actually one of the main reasons I wanted to make the video. I can confirm it's certainly complicated at the start, but it'll thankfully ease down and become more understandable afterwards. But it also shouldn't shock you that this will be the biggest part of the video. One thing I do want to note though, is that while I'm trying to avoid going into any actual story details so that you can read 100% blind, I will have to at least mention the existence of 2 events to have this be as clear as I want it to be. You might have heard of these 2 events due to how publicized they were, but rest assured, I still won't give details as to what happens in them so you can read unspoiled. We begin Archie Sonic where you think we do, before issue 1. Yup, just like Spider-Man and Batman, we don't have a standard beginning. Instead, we start with the 4-issue Sonic the Hedgehog miniseries, with issue 0 to be precise. Some elements of this comic are debatably canon, but some parts are referenced, so you might as well read it. After that, we move on to issue 1 of the main Sonic the Hedgehog comic, which ran for a total of 290 issues before cancellation, and unlike Fleetway Sonic, none of them are reprints. You're in for the long haul here. At this point, things get a bit complicated. Within the first 100 issues of this comic, several different miniseries, a bunch of one-issue 48-page specials, and even a full ongoing spin-off were all published in this general time frame, all occurring at specific points in the story. It's the same type of problem that plagues many superhero comics. I'm going to try and tell you when these occur and what's the best place to read them, but I don't blame you if you get a little confused. Even I had to double-check these just to make sure I was right. The first place we stop is with the 48-page special Sonic in Your Face, which occurs between issues 18 and 19. Next is the 3-issue Princess Sally miniseries, which follows up from a story in issue 20, but timeline-wise actually happens between issues 23 and 24. Afterwards, we have Sonic and Knuckles, the 48-page special, not the game, which occurs between issues 25 and 26. Almost immediately after that, we have the Sonic Triple Trouble special between issues 26 and 27. Then, Tails gets the spotlight in the 3-issue Sonic the Hedgehog's Buddy Tails miniseries, also just known as the Tails miniseries, and that happens between issues 29 and 30. And then we have a quick stop with the Knuckles Chaotix special between issues 30 and 31. The two rivals clash in the Supersonic vs. Hyper Knuckles special between issues 33 and 34. The Rad Red proves his popularity by being the star of the 3-issue Sonic's Friendly Nemesis Knuckles miniseries, also just known as the Knuckles miniseries, set between issues 36 and 37. Ultimately, they clash again in the Sonic and Knuckles Mecha Madness special between issues 39 and 40, my personal favorite of the specials, just because of the amazing art by Patrick Spaziante. We remember the Blue Blur exists with the 3-issue Sonic Quest miniseries between issues 41 and 42. Then we try and forget the existence of the Sonic Live special, even though we need to read it between issues 42 and 43. Yes, this infamous comic is canon, partly at least. Blasting onto the scene is the Sonic Blast special between issues 44 and 45. After all of that, we can start talking about Sonic Super Special, a quarterly spin-off series of 48-page specials, and Knuckles the Echidna, a full ongoing series on the Guardian himself. Some of the Super Specials tend to bounce around a bit in relation to the placement in the story, so bear with me here. Also, I'll be referring to Sonic Super Special as SSS from now on, just for the sake of brevity. It should come as no surprise that our very next stop is issue 113. Yes, I'm serious. This issue might have been published much later, but it chronologically occurs before issue 46. Fun fact, this issue is an adaptation of the Sonic SatAM episode Cry of the Wolf, albeit with some details changed. Not so fun fact, this issue has possibly the worst art in the series. It's so bad that Adam Bryce Thomas, one of the many fantastic artists of IDW Sonic and in the last years of the Archie Sonic comics, redrew the entire issue. There's no colors or dialogue, but if you want to see how much better it could have looked after reading the original, I'll provide a link in the description. Back on track, we read SSS issue 1 between issues 46 and 47. From there, we continue until we get to issue 50, and then replace that with SSS issue 6. See, SSS issue 6 is considered the director's cut version of issue 50, incorporating new scenes and adding to the finale of this important story arc. In fact, my word choice of replace is quite apt, as the original issue 50 was never reprinted, instead just using SSS issue 6, so you might as well just read that instead. After finishing SSS issue 6, the events of the Knuckles the Echidna comic properly begin, so you should start reading that. Now the fun begins, and I'm absolutely being sarcastic when I say that. Shortly afterwards, we read SSS issue 2 between issues 52 and 53. Now, SSS issue 3 is rather special, as it's the only SSS issue that's nothing but reprints of older stories. In fact, it's a reprint of Sonic Firsts, right down to the cover. A reprint of a reprint. Reprintception! So you can skip this issue, but I'd like to point out the interesting tidbit that this is the only issue of Archie Sonic to make its way to the games. It's included in the Sonic Mega Collection released in 2002, and actually served as my introduction to Sonic comics in general. I didn't start collecting them yet because I was still young and dumb, but I can't deny it got me interested. Even though I had no idea what was going on, seeing some of the cast I knew with other interesting characters in these colorful stories while listening to the soothing, extra menu music of the collection was a surprisingly magical experience for me, and still serves as a happy memory from my childhood. Moving on. From there, we make sure to read through issue 1 through 9 of Knuckles before moving into issue 56. Then, I hope you like double features, because we read SSS issues 4 and 7 next. 7 in particular is special as it's a crossover with Image Comics. Yes, the Image Comics who publishes Savage Dragon, The Max, and Spawn. Strange, isn't it? From there, Sonic and Knuckles crisscross each other with issue 58 happening between Knuckles issues 11 and 12, with issue 59 right after. Both series continue for a bit, with Knuckles issues 19 to 21 taking place between issues 64 to 68. SSS issue 8 then happens right after issue 68. This is a good time to mention SSS issues 5 and 9, which are both prequels set when the heroes are young kids. For these, I just recommend reading them right after the previous super special issue. Unfortunately, our next pit stop is the much maligned SSS issue 15, widely considered to be one of the worst Sonic comic issues. The second story is fine, albeit unimportant, but the first story? Well, let me put it this way. It's the only other story besides issue 113 to be done by the artist called Many Hands. Once you read it, you'll try hard to forget it. Thankfully, whether you read it at all is optional, as while the first story is canon and set between issues 71 and 72, there's something later on that makes this issue superfluous. The second story is so unimportant that it's hard to lay a timeline placement for it, so you can skip this issue if you choose. Fairly quickly, though, we move on to SSS issues 10 and 12, both set between issues 72 and 73. Though SSS issue 12 is a little odd in terms of continuity placement, and also states it takes place between Knuckles issues 28 and 29. SSS issue 10 is rather interesting, though, as it's 2 crossover stories. The second with the cartoon series Sonic Underground, and the first with Sabrina the Teenage Witch? When they say comic crossovers are weird, they aren't joking. The Sabrina crossover follows up from issue 28 of her series, but don't worry about reading more, as that's the only issue you'd need to read. It's Sabrina, though, so do you really need that much background info? Besides, that crossover is likely non-canon anyway, so only read if you're curious. As for Sonic Underground, if you need an understanding of that series, then I'd recommend watching at least the first 3 episodes, but even the show's opening song might give you enough to work with. Now we move to SSS issue 11, which is up and down and all around. This issue has 5 different stories taking place at different points, making it a bit of a hassle to read chronologically if you decide to tackle the comics that way. Story 1 takes place before issue 74. Stories 2 and 3 are after issue 75. Story 4 is set between issues 77 and 78, and the last story is set between Knuckles issues 29 and 30. Afterwards, you can basically finish the last issues of the Knuckles comic. The last 2 super specials are thankfully straightforward, with SSS issue 13 set between issues 82 and 83, and SSS issue 14 happening between issues 87 and 88. With that, we now just go forward with the main comic, as aside from having read issue 113 earlier if you chose to, there's no spin-offs for basically the next 70-plus issues. Though I would recommend watching Sonic the Hedgehog the movie, also commonly called the Sonic OVA, as one of the issues sort of makes a connection to it. Who here knows what Free Comic Book Day is? Even if you don't, you can probably figure it out by the name. It's one day a year where specific comic issues are distributed for free, thus the name of Free Comic Book Day, or FCBD for short. They can contain exclusive original stories as a way for new readers to test out whether they'd like to read the main comic, but more often contain reprints, previews of upcoming content, and miscellaneous information. Of course, Sonic had a few issues like this. The 2007 special had a story set between issues 173 and 174, and while not particularly important, except for the ending, it's still a fun read. 2008 and 2009 also had issues, but the former was just a reprint of issue 1 with a new cover, and the latter some data files that would be reprinted later in a much more expansive book, so you can skip those 2 issues. Now we get to talk about everybody's favorite thing, anime. I swear this is important. SEGA and TMS Entertainment worked together to create a Sonic the Hedgehog anime series, ultimately naming it Sonic X. It became immediately famous for being the introduction of a mass voice actor change for the games, including my personal favorite VA for Sonic and Shadow. So why am I telling you this? Because Archie got the license to publish a comic for Sonic X, originally just a miniseries before the positive reactions to its announcement turned it into a full ongoing that lasted 40 issues. The issues take place between episodes of Season 2, and I originally wasn't going to note these, but my research showed the placements were actually quite simple, so why not? Sonic X issues 1 to 9 take place between episodes 32 and 33. Issues 10 and 11 between episodes 39 and 40, issues 12 to 14 between episodes 42 and 43, and issues 15 to 22 between episodes 46 and 47. The remaining issues, 23 to 40, all take place before episode 47. Sort of. You see, issue 23 contains a notable continuity error with one of its characters. They refer to an action they performed in episode 50. The problem is that once episode 47 starts, it's a straight shot to the season 2 finale with no breaks, so it's impossible for him to reference the event at that point. I'm trying to say as few spoilers as possible. The point is, it's a fairly blatant contradiction with the show, which is really ironic considering issue 23 is all about continuity and was written by Ian Flynn, the continuity man himself. Oh well, mistakes happen. In this case, we have 2 options. Option 1, the character did something similar off-screen that landed him in this position, got back his job between the comic and show somehow, and then repeats his mistake because he's dumb. Option 2, the comic is an alternate canon that has most of the show's events happen, but diverges before the end of Season 2. I'll leave it up to you to decide which option you prefer, though I would still recommend watching the show, especially Season 3 in both English and Japanese. The important point here is issue 40. While most of the comic does, maybe, take place in the canon of the anime and thus has no effect on the main comic universe, the last issue serves as a connecting point, taking place between issue 196 and Sonic Universe issue 1. I will note you can still easily read the main story of the comic without reading or watching any of Sonic X, so it's truly up to you if you want to have that complete of an experience. Of course, now we can move on to my personal favorite of any Sonic comic, regardless of publisher, Sonic Universe. Sonic is a great protagonist, but have you ever said to yourself, I like Sonic, but I kind of want to see what's going on with the other characters? Well, Sonic Universe is the comic for you. This series is mostly comprised of 4-issue arcs that focus on some of the other game casts besides Sonic as the protagonist, with some exceptions. This helps provide a lot of variety in the stories and keeps things fresh. Do you love Shadow? Well, he's got some stories. Are the Chaotix your favorites? They've got some too. Even Eggman is the protagonist for a couple stories. It's awesome. An overall fantastic way to expand on the main universe of the comics while still telling interesting stories of its own. Enough geeking out from me, though. Let's get back to the reading order. I'll be covering Sonic Universe from each individual arc, as it's just easier to explain that way. And from here on, I'll be referring to Sonic Universe issues under the abbreviation of SU, just to make this a bit quicker. SU issues 1 to 4 are the Shadow Saga, and of course feature everyone's favorite Black Hedgehog as the protag. As mentioned before, issue 1 follows up right after issue 40 of Sonic X, but from there on, issues 2 to 4 take place directly after issue 198 of the main book. Slight note, issue 4 has a notable error in the coloring. I'd recommend reading the trade paperback version if possible, as the error is fixed there. Fun fact, this arc is where the infamous Shadow meme face comes from. Thank Tracy Yardley for this greatness. Next is SU issues 5 to 8, known as the Mobius 30 Years Later arc. This is a sequel to a story called Mobius 25 Years Later, which depicts a possible future for the comics world. As such, it's difficult to give it an exact placement, so I just suggest reading it after issue 200. SU issues 9 to 12 is Knuckles Returns, or Echoes from the Past. Some of these arcs have two different names, and lets the Rad Red have the spotlight again in a story set after issue 204. The next arc is Journey to the East in SU issues 13 to 16, happening between issues 209 and 210. This is one of the exceptions I mentioned, with Sonic playing a lead role, though it makes sense as it was part of a large story going on in the main comic at the time called the Iron Dominion Saga. Technically, the 30 Years Later arc could also be an exception, but the Sonic in that story was an alternate/possible version of him, while this stars the main version. We get a slight pit stop for the 2010 FCBD issue, which has an original story between issues 211 and 212. From there, we have The Tails Adventure, or Trouble in Paradise, in SU issues 17 to 20, happening right after issue 212. The next arc after that is Treasure Team Tango, one of my personal favorites, in SU issues 21 to 24. It occurs after the second story in issue 217, but I'd recommend reading after 218 instead so you don't interrupt the main story in those issues. Next is SU issues 25 to 28, known as the Silver Saga, or Fractured Mirror. This is another one of my favorites, partially due to Silver being my favorite Sonic character. It's also rather interesting due to potentially being inspired by a comic called Other M, but I won't talk about it in this video. Maybe later. Anyway, due to the setting of this comic, it's difficult to say exactly when it's taking place, but we do know for certain it at least takes place before the end of issue 225, so just read it before that. Then we have two more FCBD specials, the 2011 and 2012 issues. The 2011 FCBD issue is quite notable for being a full remake of the main story of Sonic Super Special issue 15. Remember how I said the story as it was shown in that issue was superfluous? This is why. Because it's entirely retconned with a much better version, both writing-wise and art-wise. The story is presented as a flashback and still set between issues 71 and 72, but the beginning and end are specifically shown as Sonic remembering this between issues 224 and 225. So you could just skip SSS issue 15 and read this instead. The 2012 special is much easier, as it's simply a reprint of the main story of issue 230, but also contains 5 pages of short stories set during issues 229 and 230. Not really required to read, but they're there if you want to fill in some gaps for a story arc happening in those issues. SU issues 29 to 32 is Scourge Lockdown, or Inside Job, which occurs at the exact same time as issues 226 to 229, though I'd just recommend reading one arc completely and then read the other rather than constantly switching back and forth. This is another one of the exceptions, as Scourge is a comic original character leading the arc, yet he's an alternate version of Sonic, so he just barely skids by the limitations of not being a game character. Though I suppose it helps that he was an extremely popular character when the comic was running, and is still fairly popular today. We race into the next arc titled Babylon Rising, with SU issues 33 to 36, happening between issues 232 and 233. This arc is actually written by fan-favorite artist Tracy Yardley, who'd previously also written issues 24, 28, and 29 of Sonic X, and will go on to write another universe arc later. He does a great job with the writing and art, making this arc a real blast to read through. Have you wanted to see a comic with the mad scientist as the protagonist? Well, I'd say go read Sonic X, since Eggman is the real star there, but also read this. Scrambled, running from SU issues 37 to 40. It happens in between issues 234 and 236. Getting to see Baldy McNosehair build himself up to achieve victory is oddly thrilling, but this arc in particular reminds you as to why he's the main villain of the comic series. We race to win with SU issues 41 to 44, known as Secret Freedom or Unsung Heroes, happening between issues 240 and 241. I'd like to pause to mention that Sonic Universe issue 41 and Sonic issue 237 were actually the first Sonic comics I ever bought. Like I said, I was too young and dumb to start collecting them after reading what was in the Mega Collection, but I picked these up on a whim. While issue 237 didn't hook me because I had no context as to what was happening, Universe somehow did. Despite me having no idea what was going on besides Silver being there, it intrigued me enough that I decided to keep reading. The rest is history. I especially have to credit this arc and the fantastic writing for Silver altogether throughout the comics for being one of the things that helped him become my favorite Sonic character. With our detective's intuition, we start Chaotix's quest, or All for One, in SU issues 46 to 49. This arc happens at least before the end of issue 246, but I suggest reading it before issue 243 just so you don't have to interrupt a story. Then we have one of the few single issue stories in this comic with SU issue 50, Forged in Fire, which happens between issues 246 and 247. As an unfortunate bit of trivia, this issue was originally going to be an epilogue to the Sonic Underground cartoon, but behind the scenes shenanigans happened and this was changed, thus depriving fans of the cartoon from finally getting an ending. This is a good time to mention some extra stuff. One aspect the comic had to struggle with was whenever a new game came out, the team usually had to come up with a tie-in that incorporated characters and plot elements from that new game into the comic somehow. Issue 98 is a clear example of how this hurt the pacing of the story due to how random this is. They eventually came up with a fairly clever solution. Just set the tie-ins outside the main canon. By putting them in an alternate universe and simply labeling them as in another time, in another place, they could do what they needed to and move on with no trouble. Not all the stories use this setting, but the point remained the same. The games in question were as follows: Sonic Chronicles in issue 191, Sonic Unleashed in issue 193, Sonic and the Black Knight in issue 197, Sonic Colors in issue 219, Sonic Generations in issue 230, Sonic 4 in Sonic Super Special Magazine issue 3, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed in Sonic Universe issue 45, Sonic Jump in Sonic Super Digest issue 5, Sonic Dash in Sonic Super Special Magazine issue 10, and for some reason the 2012 Olympic Games in issue 242. Sonic and the Secret Rings also got one as a bonus for pre-ordering the game, but was thankfully reprinted, and Sonic Lost World got a prologue in the 2013 Halloween Comic Fest special, and seemed like it would have been part of the main canon later. Maybe. Sonic Archives was a series of reprints of the main comic, but as a bonus, Volume 5 contained a completed version of a scrapped story serving as a sequel to a story in issue 4. The story in this volume isn't canon, though, due to presenting a different origin for one of the characters, so don't worry if you don't read it. The complete Sonic Comic Encyclopedia is exactly what it says: an encyclopedia compiling information about the series' lore through many data files on the characters, groups, locations, and other aspects of the world. It even includes a full map and a timeline going up to at least past issue 240. Most of this will be stuff you already know, but there's still some new info in there. And finally, we have a total of 24 excerpts originally published on the Archie Sonic blog. While the blog is now defunct, these small stories have been recovered and can now be read on the Sonic Wiki. They're mainly journal entries and messages to other characters, but they're worth the few minutes it'll take to read all of them if you're interested. Here's a list of when they occur. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to something more important. Megaman. Seem random? Well, Archie naturally started reaching out to other game publishers for the chance to make comics on another IP. If Sonic was this successful, why not? Ultimately, Capcom agreed, and a comic started being published based on the classic Mega Man games. While it would contain the same creative team as the Sonic comics, including writer Ian Flynn, it would strive to be a far closer adaptation of the games in comparison to the Sonic comics, while still taking some creative liberties to connect some aspects better and expand the world. The result is easily one of my favorite comics ever, and one of my personal favorite versions of Mega Man. Why am I telling you all this? Because they would naturally have a crossover with each other. Utilizing 4 issues each from Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic Universe, and Mega Man, this 12-part story would become a fan favorite for practically being a love letter to both series. As you can guess, this is one of the heavily publicized events I mentioned at the start. I couldn't go without directly mentioning it since, unlike a lot of crossover comic stories, this one is actually canon to both the Archie Sonic and Mega Man comics, having important effects on their stories. As a result of this, reading Mega Man is somewhat required to get full context. Don't worry though, as not only is the comic good, but there's no spin offs to worry about, so it's just a straightforward read, and it starts from the beginning of the classic series, so even if you know nothing about Mega Man, you'll be just fine. The crossover story, Worlds Collide, bounces back and forth between the various issues. The exact reading order is as follows: Mega Man issue 24, SU issue 51, Sonic issue 248, Mega Man issue 25, SU issue 52, Sonic issue 249, Mega Man issue 26, SU issue 53, Sonic issue 250, Mega Man issue 27, SU issue 54, and Sonic issue 251. After this, the next issue of each series continues as normal, so let's get back to that. Issue 252, Sonic, and issue 28 of Mega Man pick up right after the crossover and keep going from there. Meanwhile, the next universe arc is Pirate Plunder Panic, a sequel to Treasure Team Tango, running from SU issues 55 to 58. This is the other universe arc written by Tracy Yardley, and he once again did a fantastic job. Timeline-wise, it all takes place at least before issue 256, so you might as well read it before issue 253, just so you're not bouncing back and forth. The next 3 arcs are Shadowfall in SU issues 59 to 62, The Great Chaos Caper in SU issues 63 to 66, and Total Eclipse in SU issues 67 to 70. Collectively, they're known as the Dark Trilogy. The Shadowfall and Great Chaos Caper arcs both start before issue 257, though Chaos Caper concludes after issue 263, so that's probably your best reading spot. And then just read Total Eclipse right after. Then we have Spark of Life in SU issues 71 to 74, happening between issues 271 and 272. It's another exception to the rule I mentioned, as the protagonists of this story are Sally Acorn and Nicole, characters introduced in the Sonic SatAM cartoon series. The scripts for these issues is written by Aaliyah Baker, who had written the second stories in issues 260 to 263, and would continue to write stories for the comic up to the end. Spark of Life is probably one of my top 10 favorite Sonic comic stories, and I really wish Aaliyah would be given an opportunity to write for IDW Sonic, because I know she could make some great character-focused stories like she does in Archie Sonic. Finally, we have SU issue 75, titled Fury, which happens right after issue 272. One set of stories I have to mention around now is Sonic Comic Origins, which, as you can surmise by the title, is about the origins of certain characters. There's only 8 of them, with each only being 5 pages, except for one that's 10 pages, so you might as well read them if possible, though they aren't absolutely necessary. The stories for Sally and Rotor, which were published in the 2014 FCBD issue, along with the stories for Antoine and Bunny in Sonic Super Digest issues 8 and 9, and the story for Nicole in Sonic Supersized Comics Digest issue 11, all happen one after another directly after issue 259. Razor the Shark's origin in Sonic Super Digest issue 15 happens sometime after issue 263, while Snively's origin in Digest issue 12 happens sometime after SU issue 70. Lastly, the 2015 FCBD issue has Into the Unknown, which occurs between issues 271 and 272. Now, remember how Archie made a comic based on the then ongoing Sonic show of the time with Sonic X? Well, they did it again by making a comic for the cartoon series Sonic Boom, though this one actually happened at the start of the show's lifetime. You don't need to watch the show to read this comic, as it's mainly a comedy book. But why am I bringing this up? Because we have another crossover, of course. Worlds Unite is the second comic crossover between Sonic and Megaman, and the other publicized event I mentioned. Since the first worked so well, why not do another? Why not add Sonic Boom and Mega Man X into the mix? And how about we also bring in 12 other SEGA and Capcom game series? Yeah, this story is a little bigger in scope than the last, but not nearly as successful. As mentioned, other games from the game publishers were brought in to draw in fans of those games and potentially secure Archie the chance to make comics based on those games. It didn't work. Now, I'm going to tell you what other games are included, but just in case you want it to be a surprise, skip to this time code listed in the video or description. The SEGA games included are Skies of Arcadia, Alex Kidd, Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg, Panzer Dragoon, Golden Axe, and of course, Knights. The Capcom games included are Okami, Street Fighter, Beautiful Joe, Ghosts and Goblins, Monster Hunter, and Breath of Fire, specifically Breath of Fire 3. With that out of the way, let's get to the reading order. Worlds Unite uses 3 issues of each series along with 2 special issues called Worlds Unite Battles that show some fights that happened off-screen. The order of issues is as follows: SU issue 76, Sonic Boom issue 8, Mega Man Worlds Unite Battles, Sonic issue 273, Mega Man issue 50, SU issue 77, Sonic Boom issue 9, Sonic Worlds Unite Battles, Sonic issue 274, Mega Man issue 51, SU issue 78, Sonic Boom issue 10, Sonic issue 275, and Mega Man issue 52. After this, Sonic Boom would conclude with issue 11, and Mega Man would end abruptly in issue 55. However, not all is lost with the Blue Bomber. After a brief stint at Boom Studios, who would only make a 6-issue comic sequel to the Mega Man Fully Charged cartoon, Udon would obtain the comic license and start publishing original Mega Man comics. Most notably, though, they announced that all issues of the Archie Mega Man comic, or at least the 48 issues not part of a crossover, would be reprinted in a 4-volume series of graphic novels called Mega Man Adventures. Each volume will also contain new material made by the original comic team. So if you want to read the Archie Mega Man comic, this will be your best chance. Now let's just hope Udon can keep to a good release schedule, unlike usual. From here, we don't have much of the Archie Sonic comic left. The main comic would continue with issue 276, while SU issues 79 to 82 would be a story called The Silver Age. This story actually happens before Worlds Unite and the origin story Into the Unknown, but I'd honestly just recommend reading it after the crossover. Additionally, this arc is the first officially written Sonic story by regular Sonic artist Evan Stanley, who would later go on to become one of the lead writers of IDW Sonic and the lead artist of SEGA of America's Sonic lore team. Her writing is great, so you're in for a real treat with this story. Eggman steals the spotlight again in SU issues 83 to 86, Eggman's Dozen, happening between issues 279 and 280. Then the Rad Red and Rosie Rascal team up in SU issues 87 to 90, Shattered, which begins before issue 284, but ends after issue 287. So you'll be doing a small bit of jumping between stories. Lastly is the case of the Pirate Princess, happening directly after issue 287 in SU issues 91 to 94. After a few more issues of the main comic, Archie Sonic was cancelled, though the covers and solicitations of the next few issues of the main comic and Sonic Universe were shown and can be seen on the wiki. So we can speculate on what may have happened. There was also Sonic Mega Drive and Sonic Mega Drive The Next Level. These classic Sonic stories set after the original trilogy were a ton of fun, and basically Sonic Mania before that existed. Unfortunately, the last issue of this miniseries was also cancelled. As you can see, Archie Sonic has quite the long legacy, and its sudden end hit fans hard. But we have to look to the future, though I still hope you'll take time to read this series from start to finish. As for places to start, there's 3. The first is just read from the beginning, whether that be from issue 1 or issue 0 of the miniseries. Though I'd recommend including the miniseries because 4 more issues isn't that big a deal. The next possible place is issue 160, the point when Ian Flynn and Tracy Yardley joined the comic. At this particular spot, the comic becomes a lot more fun and focuses on game elements more. Just be forewarned, you'll be missing a lot of context to past stuff, even with some reminders thrown at you. You'll be going into the deep end right away. The last possible place is issue 252. Due to the effects the first crossover has on the comic, this is a good enough entry point, especially if you want it to resemble the games more. A quick detour I should mention is that Archie also published a comic for one other SEGA game, Knights. It only ran for 6 issues and certainly took some creative liberties, which is no surprise considering there was only one game at the time, but it's an interesting comic if you're curious. Though I do need to note that despite how often Sonic and Knights cross over, this comic actually has no connection to Archie Sonic. So if you don't feel like reading it, no worries. And with that, we can move on to... Oh, right. You. I suppose I have to talk about this to some extent, or somebody will bring it up. Remember that I mentioned the 30 Years Later arc was a sequel to a previous arc called 25 Years Later? 25 Years Later was written by one of the lead writers of early Archie Sonic, Ken Penders, but he left the book shortly after Ian became lead writer. Penders ended 25 Years Later on a cliffhanger that Ian resolved in a story of the same name, which is what 30 Years Later is a sequel to. However, sometime down the line, Penders got into legal disputes with Archie and SEGA over the ownership of characters and concepts he created for the comic. I won't get into details here, but it didn't go well, and Penders ultimately gained the right to still use his characters and concepts for new original stories, even though they were made to be Sonic characters. He just can't reference or use Sonic and other SEGA content directly. Maybe. Thus, we have the Laura Sue Chronicles, an alternate sequel to the 25 Years Later arc following one of the characters introduced in it. Because of the circumstances I described, this book is in a weird state of being both official and unofficial at the same time. You won't find it on the Sonic Wiki, but it exists. Let me be perfectly clear. You do not have to read this. It is its own separate continuity and isn't required in any way. If you're that curious about it, I won't try to stop you. But if you're just looking to read Archie Sonic in general, you don't need to. Now, let's move on to more actual Sonic content. The day Archie Sonic graced your world was November 24th, 1992. But for Sonic and SEGA, it was Tuesday. And on July 19th, 2017, it came to an end. And then just 2 days later, IDW Sonic was announced. This comic started off with quite the bang, immediately coming into existence after Archie Sonic ended, and soon announcing that most of the creative team jumped over to it. In short, fans didn't have to wait long before Sonic came back to comics. This section is notably going to be much easier to summarize compared to Archie, so let's start the wacky workbench that is IDW Sonic. Unlike the 2 previous comic series, IDW Sonic starts after a specific point in the pre-existing story, specifically after the latest mainline game in the series at the time, Sonic Forces, beginning 1 month after the game. As I said before, this comic was retroactively made canon to the games, and references to game material are fairly common. So while you don't need to have knowledge of the games to enjoy the story, it would certainly help. In terms of spin-offs, IDW Sonic is much simpler compared to Archie Sonic, not even having another ongoing comic running alongside it as of this video. Just some 4-issue miniseries and one-shot issues. The first stop is the 2019 annual issue, with all 5 of its stories taking place sometime after issue 12. Then we have the first miniseries, Tangle and Whisper, happening in between issues 16 and 17. If you've played Sonic Racing Cross Worlds and wondered just who these 2 characters are, they come from the IDW comics, and this great miniseries in particular is just one of the various reasons they're so popular. IDW, please give them a sequel miniseries, I beg you. Moving on, we get to the 2020 annual issue, which has 6 different stories all occurring at separate points. Big's big adventure actually starts at the beginning of the series and goes up to what was happening when this comic was released, even briefly crossing paths with the last story in this annual, The Catalyst. Both of these stories are best read between issues 23 and 24. The second story, Darkest Hour, coincides with the events of issues 19 and 20, so you should read this before or after those issues. Reflections, the third story in the issue, happens directly after issue 15. Based on some context, the fourth story, Eggman's Day Off, seems to happen during or before issue 21, though I'd just suggest reading it before. And finally, the fifth story, Flock Together, happens before issue 22. This annual certainly requires jumping back and forth with the main comic if you want to read chronologically, but you could also just read the whole thing after issue 23 if you want, thus having the purpose of some stories to fill in some gaps. Our next miniseries is Bad Guys, which happens between issues 32 and 33. Also happening at some point after issue 32 is the 2022 Free Comic Book Day issue and the 5th anniversary edition of issue 1, which contained a small new bonus story. Next up is the 2022 annual, which also features 6 stories. The first story, Guardians, happens right after issue 47. Additionally, the third and fourth stories, Hero Camp and Future Growth, are quite ambiguous about when they happen, other than being after issue 32. So you might as well read them after issue 47, just like the first story. Same thing applies to the fifth story, Another Grand Adventure for Jet the Hawk, which at least takes place before or after issue 45. So just read all of these stories together for ease. The only outliers here are the second story, Weapons, which occurs immediately after issue 36, and the last story, Rough Patch, which takes place after issue 48. Following that, the third miniseries is Imposter Syndrome, which is a little more complicated in its order. The first part shows an event from issue 45, but then references the end of that specific arc in the main comic. So you start this miniseries after issue 47. However, the final issue of the miniseries overlaps with issue 49. In short, the first 3 issues of this miniseries should be read after issue 47, and then the last issue either before or after issue 49. Thankfully, the next miniseries is quite simple. Scrapneck Island happens between issues 56 and 57. Easy. The same can be said for the 2024 annual issue, which only has 3 stories this time. Story 1, Heroes Calling, happens after issue 75. For My Destiny, the second story, ends with To Be Continued in issue 80, so we assume it happens between issues 79 and 80. And then the last story, Shattered Diamonds, occurs between issues 56 and 57. Now we talk about several one-shot issues. The 900th Adventure, Endless Summer, Halloween Special, yes, the title is just that simple, Winter Jam, and Spring Broken. References to events from the main comic are few and far between in these stories, to the point where you could read a couple of these with no prior knowledge of IDW Sonic and still be fine. The only thing that's certain is that they have to happen after issue 32, and so I can only give my personal recommendation, which is to read them between issue 56 and 57, since issue 57 begins a long string of events with not much break between them. That's basically it for the main comic, aside from one notable thing: Sonic Frontiers. As mentioned, this comic has largely taken place after Sonic Forces, but the events of Sonic Frontiers are confirmed to finally happen between issues 83 and 84. Or at least that's what most of us assumed, as issue 84 is the first comic appearance of Sage, a character introduced in Frontiers. In actuality, Frontiers has been confirmed to instead happen shortly before issue 68. This does create a slight plot inconsistency that I hope is addressed. Regardless, you should probably play Frontiers or watch some videos of the game's story before getting to issue 84 anyway. Speaking of the games, there's also free digital comic preludes of Forces, Frontiers, and Superstars that you can read before the games. They're not published by IDW, but I felt the need to tell you that they exist in case you didn't know. But IDW did publish one-shot issues for the racing games. The Team Sonic Racing one-shot simply takes place during the game and isn't too important, so don't worry if you can't find it. Meanwhile, the Sonic Racing Crossworlds one-shot acts as a prequel to the game, giving it a little more story than just the rival interactions. Please note that Crossworlds takes place sometime after Sonic Frontiers. Beyond that, there's also been comics taking place in the classic era of Sonic, starting with the Sonic 30th Anniversary Special, which, of course, celebrated the 30th anniversary of the franchise. And later on, the 2021 Free Comic Book Day Special had an additional story that was added in the trade paperback release. This would be followed by anniversary specials for Tails and Amy, and then the 4-issue Fang the Hunter miniseries. They all occur between the events of Sonic Mania and Sonic Superstars. Later, an anniversary special for Knuckles would be made, taking place after Superstars. The last anniversary special as of this writing is for the Chaotix, though unlike all the others, it takes place in the modern era. When exactly is ambiguous, but I personally place it after Frontiers due to this piece of architecture. The very last issue of IDW Sonic to mention is Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the official movie prequel. Gotta love that punny title. As you can guess, it's the only issue set in the film universe and takes place between the first two movies. You don't need to read this for anything else IDW Sonic related, and you don't need to if you want to watch the films either, as it only serves to explain a couple small things in the second movie. I told you this would take less time. As for a good starting point to read, you have two options. Option 1 is just to start at issue 1, simple and to the point. Option 2 is to start with the classic comics, beginning with the 30th anniversary special. The classic era stories have less focus on an ongoing narrative, making them perfect if you want to dip your toes to see if you like what you're reading before taking the plunge. You could also read one of the seasonal issues I mentioned, as their lack of connections to the main plot make them perfect for a small read to see if you like the style of the comics. Just beware that a certain character's position from later in the story will be spoiled for you if you do this, but it's nothing majorly important. With all three major Sonic comics out of the way, you assume we're done, right? Wrong. We have one last miniseries to talk about, DC Cross Sonic the Hedgehog. Yes, the X is pronounced as cross. As you can tell, this comic is a crossover between the Sonic series and the Justice League of DC Comics. It's only 5 issues, so it's a quick read. Now, is it canon? Debatable. There's nothing in the comic that contradicts anything, and it seems to take place at the current time of the games, but it's never been confirmed or denied, so it's up to you. I do need to make something clear. This comic was published by DC, not IDW. So if you go looking for the trade paperback release of this book, make sure to look under the label of DC Comics. Originally, that was all I had to say, but I realized the possibility that some Sonic fans might not know much about some of these DC characters. They might wonder if it's easy to read if you don't know a lot about the DC universe. Let me assure you that all you need to know in terms of DC is just the basic information of each member of the Justice League you see here. But just in case you don't, I'll give you a rundown of the origins of each member, some of their powers, and even name a few villains they fight. I won't go into large detail, just enough to give you what you need without having to do the research yourself. Batman. Do I really need to explain him? How many times have his origins been told in various media? Young Bruce Wayne was traumatized as a child when his parents were killed by a common criminal, leaving Bruce an orphan. From that moment, he decided to help innocent people by trying to protect others and clean up the crime in Gotham City. He used his vast wealth to support himself as he trained his body and mind to their breaking points and beyond them, creating technology to help his pursuit of criminals, mastering various forms of martial arts, studying almost every subject he could to be the ultimate detective when a problem couldn't be solved through force, and donned an outfit based on a creature he himself feared, hoping to strike that same fear into those he fought. He was vengeance. He was the knight. He was Batman. But underneath the cowl, he's still the sad child wishing he could be with his parents again. Despite his accomplishments and status as one of the greatest superheroes, Bruce is still just a normal human, making his achievements all the more impressive, especially as he tangles with some of DC's most vile villains, like the psychotic and murderous Joker. Superman, DC's big blue Boy Scout. Born as Kal-El on the planet Krypton, he was sent by his parents to Earth before his planet blew up. If this sounds familiar to any Dragon Ball fans, Toriyama was known for being inspired by various pieces of media. Once he landed, he was found and adopted by a couple in Kansas, given the name Clark Kent, and lived a normal life in Smallville. At least till his powers started coming out, and his parents had to explain how he wasn't from Earth. From there, Clark learned to control his abilities gained from soaking in the light of a yellow star, aka the sun, which happened to include flight, super strength, incredible intelligence, super speed, invulnerability to most things, heat vision, freezing breath, super hearing, and X-ray vision. Upon moving to Metropolis, Clark started working alongside fellow reporter and love interest Lois Lane as he donned a costume, took off his glasses, and became the Man of Steel whenever someone was in danger, whether it be in Metropolis or anywhere else. He would use his powers to fight for truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. His only weakness tends to be kryptonite, radioactive chunks of his former planet that basically act like poison to him, getting worse the closer he is, the light of a red star, which drains him, and magic. He's tangled with many villains over the years, but two of his most notable are Lex Luthor, owner of LexCorp and rich genius who wants to control everything through either his money or technology, and Darkseid, a member of the race known as the New Gods, ruler of Apocalypse, and basically a god of evil. He constantly wages war for one reason, his pursuit of the anti-life equation, which will allow him to either conquer or destroy the universe. Wonder Woman, daughter of Hippolyta, princess of the island Themyscira, bisexual champion of the Amazons. Going under the identity of Diana Prince when out in the world, Diana is the warrior many strive to be. With bracelets that can deflect most projectiles, a lasso of truth to get enemies to spill their secrets, strength surpassing Hercules, wisdom to lead her allies, and the heart to empathize with and save whoever needs help, Diana proves why she's one of the greatest superheroes ever made. I'd go into a little more detail, but Wonder Woman has had varying interpretations over the decades. Enough that it's difficult to boil her character down to one specific version, but this is just about the basics. This even extends to her weaknesses, which, aside from some specific stuff that again varies based on the era and adaptation, is just the standard stuff even humans are weak to. She needs to breathe, sleep, and while her sight and hearing is better than normal, it's not to the level of someone like Superman, so you could sneak up on her. Good luck trying that. The Flash, known as the Scarlet Speedster and the fastest man alive. Now, the crossover is ambiguous as to whether Flash is meant to be Barry Allen or his successor, Wally West. So, I'll just talk about both, as their personalities and powers were made to be quite similar over the years. Barry Allen was a forensic scientist when, one night in the lab, he was doused with chemicals and struck by lightning at the same time. What would normally be certain death instead gave him super speed, and inspired by the legacy of Jay Garrick, the original Flash, Barry would wear the now famous red spandex, and both fight and run to protect Central City and the world. Wally West, Barry's nephew, would later meet him and learn of how he got those powers. Being the smart lad he is, he recreated the circumstances of the accident, and in what might be the biggest case of dumb luck in fiction, successfully gave himself powers too. He went under the name Kid Flash. However, when Barry sacrificed himself to save the multiverse, Wally took up the mantle to continue his legacy as the Flash. Of course, Barry later came back, don't ask how, it's complicated, and took the mantle back, though with a significantly more tragic backstory of his mother being killed when he was young and his father sent to jail for a crime he didn't commit. Barry and Wally's powers make them some of the biggest threats in the DC multiverse. Having super speed allows them to read fast, use their momentum to put some power behind their blows, create tornadoes, vibrate their molecules to pass through solid matter, and even travel through time and alternate dimensions. In fact, a Flash story is what introduced the multiverse concept to the DC universe, and Barry's meddling with time has certainly caused problems. This is all due to their connection to the Speed Force, a concept too complicated for this video. Their great weaknesses are mainly just their impatience and sometimes not taking things seriously enough. They also have some rather strange enemies, such as Reverse Flash, another speedster who goes out of their way to make the life of Flash as miserable as possible, and Gorilla Grodd, a super intelligent gorilla from Gorilla City who tried to use his genius and psychic abilities to destroy humanity so apes can rule. Green Lantern, the Emerald Knight, or Knights, I should say, because there's a lot of them. The Green Lantern Corps is basically an intergalactic force of peacekeepers. It just so happens they keep the peace by all using the powers of their lantern rings and fighting evil wherever they go. The rings are primarily powered by one emotion, their will. Yes, willpower is apparently an emotion. It's more like balance. Anyway, the rings can be used to create hard-like constructs of almost anything they want. Baseball bats, drills, a pinball table. It all depends on their creativity. The ring can also allow them to fly, breathe in space, make a bubble to act as a shield and transport things or people, shoot blasts of energy, and even translate most languages. Of course, the ring can and will run out of power, which has to be manually recharged with either a Green Lantern battery or through the will of its own user, usually happening when they chant the iconic motto of the Green Lantern Corps.
In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light!
In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light.
In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light!
Now, while the group is mostly made up of aliens recruited from across the universe, like Kilowog, Chip, and Tomar-Ray, there's a surprising amount of lanterns from Earth, and at least one is usually a member of the Justice League. For this crossover, that particular Green Lantern is John Stewart, my personal favorite. My other favorite happens to be Jessica Cruz. John is a former U.S. Marine, architect, and activist. His serious demeanor and caring attitude makes him a natural member of the Corps and eventually one of its most notable leaders. While he initially served as a replacement for regular Earth Lantern Hal Jordan in the 80s, when Hal temporarily resigned, his popularity really soared when the Justice League animated series aired, and John was one of its 7 core members, allowing his character to be more expanded on and developed. In fact, his status as a former Marine and more gruff personality came from the show and were written into the comic later because of how well received he was. For a time, John was the Green Lantern to a lot of fans, especially people who didn't read the comics, and to this day, still maintains as much popularity as Hal. If you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan of Green Lantern. The main weakness of Green Lanterns tends to be the color yellow due to things I won't get into here because it's complicated. Fittingly, one of the most notable villains they deal with is Sinestro, a former Green Lantern who's eventually removed from the group because of his methods, and then eventually fights back with a yellow ring, becoming a Yellow Lantern and eventually establishing his own Lantern Corps. Yellow Lanterns are powered by the emotion of fear. In fact, there's a bunch of other Lantern Corps, each representing a different color and emotion, but we don't have time for that today. Cyborg. Victor Stone had a relatively normal life, albeit with scientist parents who wanted him to focus on academics instead of the athletics he loved. However, after an accident that killed his mother and horribly mutilated Victor, his father Silas used all his knowledge to save Victor's life, fitting him with cybernetic parts and turning him into a cyborg. Since then, Cyborg has gone on to become one of the main members of the Teen Titans, a role he especially became famous for in the 2003 cartoon series, showing off his super strength, immense intelligence, and an awesome arm cannon. I feel like him and Megaman would be friends. Also, his hilarious friendship with Beast Boy. Over the years, Cyborg has also been a frequent member of the Justice League and even the Doom Patrol in one show. Go watch Doom Patrol, it's great. His main struggle tends to be more of a mental and emotional one, the constant question of how much of him is a man and how much is a machine. It all makes him quite the fascinating character. And that's it. The Justice League is usually made up of various heroes like these, driven by a cause to protect innocent people anywhere in the universe, not just Earth. Though they typically reside in a floating space station called the Watchtower right above the Earth. I could go on and on about other members of the League, like Supergirl, Clark's cousin who also survived Krypton's destruction, or Hawkgirl, a mace-wielding warrior and member of the alien race, the Thanagarians. And Mr. Terrific, one of the smartest characters in DC who tends to act as a chairman for the League and who you might have seen in the 2025 Superman film. But I'm babbling now. The point is, you should have everything you need to know to easily read the crossover and not get confused. Hopefully. And I hope I intrigued you enough to start reading some DC comics or watch some of their shows and films. The last thing I want to talk about is the manga. Mainly the fact that I can't talk about it much. While Sonic has had various manga over the years, with one even being where Amy and Charmy originally came from, none of them are actually canon to the games and none have been officially translated. Even if you can find some unofficial translations, the manga are straightforward enough that giving you a reading order would be pointless. Just start from the beginning. Two that I do want to mention, though, are the Jet Black Hedgehog, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Sonic and the Blade of Courage. Both have been announced to be getting international releases at some point, though this hasn't happened yet as of this video. While the Shadow manga is an adaptation of Shadow Generations and is clearly not canon, Blade of Courage is an original story, so its canon status is currently unknown. And that's it. Thank you for joining me on this little guide to the Sonic comics. And I hope I helped even a little and got people to jump into the comics a bit less confused. The Sonic comics are near and dear to my heart, containing some of Sonic's most interesting stories and characters, and I want them to get more love and appreciation for this. Side note, go check out H-Squid, as their channel is full of content about the Sonic comics, mainly Archie Sonic, and is definitely worth watching. Just beware that spoilers for stuff in the comics will be everywhere, obviously. Also, check out Adrenaline Dubs for their great comic dubs of IDW Sonic. Here's hoping they get back to them at some point. If you want to see any more content on my channel, then please like and subscribe. Every bit of positivity and motivation helps these days, and maybe check out some of my other videos. I have reactions to Ruby content and various games I play that I swear I will get back to. Life has just been crazy and keeping me in a situation not ideal to record. And once again, support the official comic creators as much as you can. Anyway, thank you for watching, and have a good night.